April 1887. Jonas Thorne rode up the Carver Bend Road with a foreclosure note folded in his breast pocket and a watch open in his hand, because the bank in Pueblo had given him until sundown to put Maren Sutcliffe off her land. He had done it 11 times that spring and had stopped counting the faces. That was the only way a man kept doing the work. You stopped looking at the woman in the doorway. You read the legal description aloud, and you rode on before the children came out. He was 34, and he was very good at not looking. The clerk who handed him the note had laughed about it. "Widow on a dead grass quarter section," he said, sliding the paper across like it was nothing. "Husband drowned 2 winters back. 11 months behind. No stock worth hauling. Easiest ride you'll have all month." The men at the land office called her place the Dust Patch, because that was all you could see of it from the road. A low soddy, a windmill that did not turn, a fence line of cottonwood posts gone silver gray. Nobody in Carver Bend believed the Sutcliffe woman would last past spring, and they said so like men who had decided not to feel bad about it. Jonas reached the rise above her quarter section a little after 4, nearly 2 hours of sun left on the watch. He stopped there, out of habit, to read the land before he read the note, to know what he was taking. And what he saw made him sit very still in the saddle. The soddy was poor. He had expected that. But behind it, where the clerk had promised nothing worth hauling, stood a barn. It was the kind of barn a man builds when he means to never leave. 40 feet of hand-hewn timber, the joints pegged not nailed, the great doors hung so true they had not sagged a half-inch in 2 hard winters. The roof rose in a long sweep that shed snow no flat shed could. Somebody had notched every beam by hand and married them without a single bolt. And the whole thing stood square to the wind on a quarter section the bank had written off as dust. Jonas had grown up in a framing yard in Missouri before the war took the men who taught him, and he had not seen joinery like that in 15 years. For a moment, he forgot the watch. Then a boy came around the corner of the barn with a bucket, saw the stranger on the rise, and ran inside. Maren Sutcliffe came out wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 26, slight, straight-backed, chestnut hair pinned off a sun-touched neck, and a steadiness in her that did not match the trembling thing the clerk had described. She did not run to meet him, and she did not run from him. She walked to the edge of her own yard and waited for the man on the horse to say what such men came to say. Jonas had seen 100 women wait, most already crying. She was not. He came down the rise slow. He did not want to, and he did not like noticing it. "Mrs. Sutcliffe," he stayed mounted. A man stayed mounted for this. It was kinder to be quick. "I'm here on behalf of the Cattlemen's Bank of Pueblo." "I know who you are," she said, low and even. "You're the one they send. I've expected you since the snow broke. Then you know what I'm holding. I know what you think you're holding." She looked at the note in his pocket, not his face. "A paper that says I'm 11 months behind. You're not wrong about that." He had expected pleading. A sick mother in the back. A baby. A tale. There was always a tale, and he had learned to let it run past him like water. But she told no tale. She looked at the barn behind her, then at him, as though she had decided he was a man who could be made to understand something, if she had the time. 11 months, he said. "The bank's been patient. The bank has never once ridden up this road to see what it's foreclosing on. Have you?" He had not. He had read the legal description and could recite the township and range in his sleep. He had never once stood on the land. "It's a quarter section of dry grass," he said. "I don't need to see it to take it." "No, you don't." She turned west, where the light was going long and gold. "Sundown, isn't it? They always say sundown." You've time to do something else first, if you've a mind. I suspect you won't." Jonas should have read the note then. The words were printed. He had only to fill the blank with her name and the date and say them aloud, and the law would be satisfied, and he could ride down before the sun touched the rim. He took the paper out and unfolded it. The boy had come back to the corner of the barn and stood watching, too young to know to stop it. An old hired man with one stiff leg and 40 years of cattle in his face stood in the great doorway, saying nothing, a curry comb in his hand. "What's in the barn?" Jonas said. He had not meant to ask it. It came out before he could stop it. Marin looked at him a long moment. "My husband. What's left of him." Tom Sutcliffe had been a wheelwright and a framer before he ever owned an acre. She told him plainly, not working for his pity. He had come west to build, not to ranch, but a man could not buy land in the Bend without running cattle, so he ran a thin herd, and he built. He built the barn first, before the house, which everyone said was a fool's order. He cut and cured every beam himself, finished the great doors that autumn, and crossed the swollen Carver in spring to fetch the last of the hardware. The river took him. He never slept a night under his own roof. "The bank means to pull it down for the timber," she said. "I've heard." "You heard wrong," Jonas said, though he did not know that he had. The bank did not want a barn 40 miles from a railhead. It wanted the section clear, and the timber sold for what it would bring. "Then tell me I heard wrong when you've read your paper. Go on. Read it." He folded the note back up instead. He told himself it was the light, that he wanted to walk the building while the sun held, to set a value, that this was bank business and not weakness. He swung down off the horse for the first time. The old man stepped aside to let him in, and that was the moment, though he did not feel it, when the day stopped being the day he had ridden up to have. If you have ever been looked at the way Jonas Thorne had looked at 11 women that spring, measured, totaled, and written off before you said a word, then you already understand why this channel exists. I tell stories about the ones the ledger gives up on too soon, the dust patch people the world decides are finished, and the rare moment the world is made to stand still and look again. If that is the kind of story that stays with you, take a moment to subscribe and ride the rest of this with me, because it is the only kind I tell here, and the part I most want you to see is still ahead. Inside the barn was cathedral cool and smelled of cured wood and clean straw. Light came down in long bars from a row of windows set high under the eaves, windows in a barn, which no practical man would trouble to cut, which a man who loved the work would not leave out. The loft floor was laid so tight you could not drop a coin between the boards. Jonas walked the length of it slow, and the old man and the boy watched him do it, and nobody said a word, because the building was doing the talking. He came back outside into the going light and did the arithmetic he was paid to do, and it came out as it always did. 11 months behind, 40 miles from a railhead, no stock to sell, no kin to wire. He could ride down and report what he had found, and the report would change nothing, because the bank did not lend on a dead man's craftsmanship. It lent on grass and stock and a man's back, and Tom Sutcliffe's back was at the bottom of the Carver. "There's a way this goes that I don't change by feeling sorry for you," he said. "I haven't asked you to feel sorry," Marin said. "I asked you to look. You've looked. Now do what you came to do. Or do better, but don't stand in my yard pitying yourself." She turned and went to the house and left him with the watch and the note and the dying light, the cruelest thing she could have done, because it left him nobody to argue with but himself. He did not read the note at sundown. He rode down the mountain in the dark and filed nothing. For 9 days he did what no foreclosure agent of the Cattlemen's Bank had ever done. He went looking for a way to make the numbers lie in her favor. He learned a railroad spur was being surveyed 40 miles south, and that a building like Sutcliffe's, taken down board by numbered board, could be carted to the line and sold whole to a horse breeder near La Junta, who wanted a thing that would stand 100 years. Dismantled and sold whole, the barn was worth a little over 4 times what Marin owed. He should have been glad. It was a clean answer. The bank takes the barn, clears the debt 4 times over, and Marin loses the one thing her husband left standing. A profitable foreclosure. He sat with the survey map open and understood he was about to be the instrument by which a dead man's 2 years of work were numbered, dismantled, and carried off to another man's yard. And that the law and every clerk who had laughed about the dust patch would call that justice. He did not file that report either. On the 10th day he rode back up the Carver Bend Road, with no note in his pocket. He had left it, deliberately, in a drawer in Pueblo. Against the far wall of the barn, under a canvas, stood Tom Sutcliffe's last work. Half a wagon, unfinished. The wheels true, and the spokes hand turned to a standard Jonas had seen once, in his grandfather's yard, before the men who knew it died. On the workbench beside it, the tools lay in their order, as though their owner had stepped out to the river and would be back by dark. A folded letter sat weighted under a wooden plane. Marin let him pick it up. To my Marin, it read, in a careful, work-roughened hand, "If the river ever beats me." Tom had written it the morning he crossed. The barn was paid for in full, every board, though the land was not, and a barn like that was worth more standing than the whole quarter section was worth as dust. If any banker came to take it, Marin was to make the man walk inside before he read his paper. Make him stand under the high windows, the letter said. No man who knows wood can take that barn down and call it nothing. Make him look. Jonas set the letter back under the plane and stood with his back to them, because he did not trust his face. "You knew I'd come up that rise and see it," he said. "I hoped a man with eyes would come," Marin said. "The kind the bank sends usually doesn't get off his horse. You got off your horse." This is the part the clerk in Pueblo never understood. The bank had sent a man to take a worthless quarter section, and the bank had been right about the section. By every number in the ledger, the place was measured correctly. The thing the ledger could not measure stood 40 feet long under high windows, pegged and true, built to outlast the bank that owned the dirt beneath it. But knowing a barn is worth saving, and being able to save it, were 2 different miles of road, and Jonas knew exactly how far apart they were. So he sold the breeder, the one wagon, with Marin's leave. Not the barn, the wagon. When a man who knew wood explained what the breeder was looking at, the price he paid for that single piece was enough to put 4 months against the debt and leave Marin the barn. It did not save her. 4 months bought time, not freedom. But it was the first month in 2 years the line in the bank's book moved the right direction, because a man had finally been made to look. Marin counted the breeder's money twice. "You sold his wagon," she said. "One wagon. To buy the barn 4 months. He'd have made that trade." His letter says the barn came first. She was quiet a while. It does say that. He came back the next month, and the month after, telling the bank he was managing a difficult foreclosure, which was true, and that the property was more complicated than the ledger showed, which was also true. He learned the names of her hired man and her boy, Asa, who had ridden for Tom and stayed on for board, because he could not abide leaving the barn to the bank, and Ned, no kin at all, who had wandered up the road the autumn the river took Tom and never wandered back down. Marin had taken in a stray man and a stray boy, and a barn she could not afford, and held all 3 together for 2 winters, while the town bet on the date she would quit. She did not quit. That was what undid him slowest and surest. He had ridden up expecting a woman to break, and she would not. And a man who spends his life watching people break does not know what to do with one who will not. By midsummer, the bank had grown tired of the difficult foreclosure. The clerk who had laughed sent a second man up the road, Silas Greer, a speculator who held paper all over the southern range and bought the bank's hard cases cheap to clear them hard. Greer did not get off his horse and did not go in the barn. He read the legal description from the rise, did the same arithmetic Jonas had done, and felt nothing at all. He offered the bank the full debt, cash, for the paper, on the condition he could take the barn down for hauling before the spur was finished, and prices rose. The bank, tired and 40 miles from caring, said yes. So on a hot, bright morning in August, Silas Greer rode up to Marin Sutcliffe's quarter section with a clear deed to her debt, a crew of 6, and a wagon of numbered tags and crowbars to take down the barn Tom Sutcliffe had built and never slept beneath. Jonas heard of it the way you hear of a death, too late to have stopped it. He had been in Pueblo arranging the 4th month. By the time he got the horse up the road, Greer's men had the great doors off their hinges and laid in the dust, and were prying the eave boards from the high windows with the careless speed of men paid by the day to wreck a thing. Marin stood in the yard. She was not crying. She had Tom's letter in her hand, the actual letter, taken from under the plane, held flat against her chest with both hands, and she watched 6 men unbuild her husband, and she did not cry, and that was somehow the worst of all of it. Jonas got down. He walked past Greer, who said something he did not hear, and stood beside her in the wreck of the yard, and looked at the doors in the dust, and the men on the roof, and the letter in her hand. The thing in him that had been bending for 4 months finally set. "Stop them," Marin said. "Not a plea, a fact. You're the only man here who knows what they're tearing down." He could not stop them. That was the truth, and they both knew it. Greer held the paper. The debt was sold and clear. The law was a wall, and Jonas had spent his whole working life on its hard side. And the wall did not move, because a man finally wished it would. So he did not try to move the wall. He did the one thing he could. He went to Silas Greer, and he bought the paper. He bought it with everything: 4 years of an agent's careful wages, the small place he had meant to buy in the Greenhorn Valley, his father's watch, a note of his own signed against work not yet done. He paid Greer the full debt and the speculator's profit on top, because a businessman will always sell a barn for more than it is worth to him, and Greer rode off that afternoon richer and untroubled. The crew packed their crowbars and went down the mountain. The doors lay in the dust. The high windows stood bare to the rafters, but the frame stood. Tom Sutcliffe's frame, pegged and true, square to the August sky, and it was Marin's again, and the only paper left in the whole matter was the note Jonas now held in his own pocket. A note that said Marin Sutcliffe owed her debt, in full, to him. He took it out. He unfolded it. He had read 100 such notes to 100 such women, filled the blank with their names, watched their faces go, and ridden down before the children came out. He stood in the wreck of Marin's yard, the boy and the old man and the widow watching, as they had in April. He tore it up. He tore the note across, and again, and let the pieces go in the hot wind, and they scattered out past the silver-gray fence posts and the windmill that did not turn. Marin watched a foreclosure agent give away 4 years of his life, his father's watch, and a debt he had every legal right to collect. She put her hand over her mouth, and she let go, at last, of the thing she had not let go of in 2 winters, and she wept. "You sold his wagon to buy 4 months, she said, when she could. You bought the whole paper to buy what? To make them put the doors back on, He looked at the great doors in the dust, and then to ask if you needed a hand hanging them. I framed barns once. It's been 15 years. Marin looked at him a long while, measuring whether a man could be made to understand a thing, and finding that he already did. The doors hang on the third try, not the first, she said. Tom learned that the hard way. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. There's daylight left. Asa, the block and tackle. Ned, hold the bottom. She looked at Jonas. You've never hung a door this size. No. You'll learn. Or you'll be useless, and I've no room for that. They hung the first door before the light went. It took the 4 of them. And it did not go true the first time or the second. On the third it settled into its hinges, with the small clean sound of a thing returning to where it belonged. Jonas Thorne stood in the cooling dusk with sawdust on his hands for the first time in 15 years, and understood that he had ridden up this road in April to take a worthless quarter section, and that he was going to spend the rest of his life on it instead. They were married in the autumn, in the barn, under the high windows, because there was no church within 40 miles, and because Marin said her husband had built the place to be stood in, and it was past time somebody stood in it for a glad reason. Asa gave her away. Ned held the ring. The same town that had called the place the Dust Patch, and bet on the date she would quit, came up the Carver Bend Road in their wagons, a little ashamed and not saying so, because that is how a town apologizes. It shows up. Tom Sutcliffe's letter sat under the plane, and the high windows let down their long bars of gold. The bank in Pueblo never understood what had happened to its easiest ride of the spring. The clerk who had laughed told the story for years as a thing Jonas Thorne did, because he had gone soft. In the ledger of the Cattleman's Bank, the Sutcliffe quarter section was marked paid in full, which was the only column the bank had ever been able to read. But the barn stands yet. A spur of the Pueblo and Arkansas Valley line came through 12 years later and made the Dust Patch worth real money, and the town grew up the road and around the great timber barn that had been there before any of it. People who never knew the names asked, as people do, who built a thing so square and so true in the middle of nowhere, and meant it to last. The answer was always 2 names, not one. The man who cut the beams and never slept beneath them, and the woman who would not let them be taken down, and a third, if the teller knew the whole of it, the man who rode up to Foreclose by sundown, looked once at the barn, and tore the note up instead. A debt can be written on paper, and paper tears. Worth is built in wood, and proven in weather, and some men ride a long way to learn which outlasts the other. If this story stayed with you, sit with it a moment before you go. And let me ask you the thing I think it's really about. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone in the first minute, measured them, written them off, and ridden on, only to be made to look again and find you'd misjudged everything that mattered? Or have you been the one written off as dust, holding on to the one thing nobody else could see the worth of, waiting for someone with eyes to ride up the road? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you'd like another story about the people the ledger gives up on too soon, and the rare few who won't let them be carried off, there's one waiting for you right here.